everyone. Thank you for joining us today to help parents, caretakers, and allies get ready for a summer break that's more about play and in-person activities and fun and less time spent on screens. Before we jump in, I want to share the exciting news that MAMA is now in more than half of the United States. Yes, we have 53 chapters in 27 states, and we are still growing. Our chapters are our lifeblood. They are the way that we make positive change, starting in local school districts, states, and on the federal level. So if you'd like to join a chapter, you can go to our website, wearemama.org, to see if there's one near you. And if there isn't, and you'd potentially like to start your own chapter, there's also a place on the site to sign up for an information session. We'll also include that sign up link in our show notes so you can learn more. At MAMA, we like to remind everybody that we're not anti-tech. We're for responsible tech. We're focused on how media addiction affects kids, and we like to advocate for safeguards that better protect them. We also strongly believe in providing real-world experiences for our children, rather than purely virtual ones. A natural time to really lean into these kinds of in-person, real-world experiences is the summer. Last year at this time, we were joined by Lenore Skenazy, the president of Let Grow, a nonprofit that promotes childhood independence, to talk about the importance of real-life experiences in childhood. We'll also link to that episode in our show notes because the information she shared is still relevant. In advance of the summer, which can often be a challenging time for parents, let's admit, we're continuing that conversation with Dr. Nidhi Gupta. Dr. Gupta will provide insight from a medical perspective on why kids should spend less time on screens and also offer tangible ways to provide real-world alternatives when your kids are home this summer. But don't think that this conversation is just for parents or caregivers. Media addiction really affects all of us. So even if you don't have children, you'll learn ways to use the summer to help you put your phone down too. Dr. Gupta is a pediatric endocrinologist, a best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, and an internationally recognized expert on digital wellness. An award-winning researcher who has authored over 100 scientific publications, she is founder of the Phreedom Foundation, and that's freedom spelled with a PH, like in phones, a nonprofit committed to helping people reclaim their time, attention, and joy in an increasingly distracted world. Dr. Gupta's research has linked screen overuse to anxiety, sleep disruption, burnout, obesity, and fragmented attention, making her a trusted voice in the global conversation on technology and health. Through retreats, coaching, school partnerships, and corporate workshops, she has inspired a growing movement towards intentional living. Dr. Gupta's best-selling book, Calm the Noise, is the natural extension of her mission. It's a personal and scientific guide to leading by example in the digital age. Dr. Gupta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for having me.
In your TED Talk, you shared a pretty shocking experience with a young patient that prompted you to explore the growing relationship between children and their devices. Can you share with our audience what that was?
Yes, Julie. Riley at that time was a 17-year-old with type 1 diabetes. I was examining her in my clinic one day and I noticed a bed sore. I was curious because generally I see bed sores in individuals who have been immobilized for a prolonged period of time. So I asked her mother, I'm like, do you know what might be going on? I'm surprised that she has a bed sore. And Riley's mother's face changed. Her eyes widened, her lips began to quiver, and then tears started pouring down her cheeks as if reality had hit her. And through her tears, she took a big gulp of air and she was like, Dr. Gupta, would it help you to know that from the minute Riley gets home from school, she cannot get up to her room fast enough, put her VR headsets on, and lays in bed the rest of the evening, sometimes even sleeping in the virtual world with her VR headsets on. That was Riley's story, and hers is just one in a series of many such encounters in my personal and professional life that drove me to launch Phreedom Foundation to help us all ungrip devices and grip life.
I mean, that's a heartbreaking story about what might seem to be an extreme case, but is it extreme? I mean, what are you finding in your practice as a pediatric endocrinologist?
While it might seem like an extreme case, Most of these stories do not begin as extreme cases. For example, Victor is a 13-year-old patient of mine. He developed severe withdrawal symptoms after his father took away his video games and phones. He was so aggressive that his mom had to call 911 to make sure everyone is safe. And then there is Allison. Her social media feed, she's 15, her social media feed tells her what she should eat in a day, how to look her thinnest best, how to be desirable. She is impressionable and she is young and she has fallen for the trap. And now she has developed anxiety, depression, and eating disorder. So, all of these situations, while they might seem like extreme cases, they begin with a familiar choice that we all as parents make every single day. What are those choices? Well, my child needs a phone due to his activities. I need to keep a track of him. We allow it only during long flights. Well, he socializes with his friends through social media. Or she feels left out if she's the only one without social media. Don't they need to learn how to use a phone responsibly? These are not reckless decisions. These are well thought, reasonable, intentional choices. Yet, majority of the extreme cases begin with these familiar choices.
One of the things we often hear is that it's hard to tell what's normal teen behavior and what are actually signs of media addiction. In your TEDx talk, you talked about how media addiction is a real thing with real consequences on our physical health and not just our medical health. Can you talk a little bit more about what those are?
That is very close to what I'm seeing every single day in my clinic as a pediatric endocrinologist. I think as a community, we have become addicted to dopamine. And there are two sources of dopamine. Number one is food, number two is screen. In the context of today's conversation, let's see how screens play out that leads to impact on physical health. Here is how the domino effect begins. Excessive time spent on screen leads to reduced physical activity, more sedentary time. Brain does not register fullness when we are eating while we are engaged with screens, which means we do not register that sense of satiety and we keep eating. And the final kicker, when we are constantly exposed to those hits of dopamine, we raise our threshold for pleasure, and then the same content does not seem appealing enough. From research, we found that individuals who have been exposed to screens for a long time may get desensitized to the pleasures of the screen, and then they might turn to something else to get the same level of kick. In that study, what did the adolescents turn to? They turned to drugs, alcohol, pornography, and in my experience, what else are kids turning to? They're turning to high sugar, high salt, high fat, calorie dense, ultra processed foods. Now, in terms of what is the data behind this, over the last 30 years, the prevalence of obesity in male adolescents has increased by 160% in boys and 190% in girls. What is disturbing is that if these trends continue, by year 2030, nearly 30 to 50% of our youth will struggle with obesity and all of the health impacts that come with obesity: hypertension, prediabetes, diabetes, high cholesterol levels, hormone imbalance, and the list goes on.
I really appreciate you highlighting the physical impact. You know, I started Mama because of seeing the emotional impact and the youth mental health crisis and growing rates of suicide and suicidality. But also, these physical effects ultimately come back and affect our mental well-being as well. So it's also interconnected. I think most of our audience, especially those with kids or who interact with them, sense that social media and gaming and even YouTube are affecting children, but they may not know why. Can you give some insight, sort of break it down into why our devices and why these online digital products are so addictive and why and how they trigger dopamine release?
They are addictive because they are intentionally designed to be addictive by content developers who know exactly human brain works. Content developers who are experts in the principles of behavior addiction and psychology. What is behavior addiction? There are many definitions, but the simplest definition is unsuccessful attempts to control one's behavior, even though we understand the harms in the short term and in the long term. For example, we're going to bed, looking at our phone, scrolling just for a relaxing time, just for me time, and 45 minutes later, still checking. unsuccessful attempts to control one's behavior. Now, what is driving this behavior? Dopamine, the anticipation hormone. It's a sneaky neurotransmitter that is released in the brain in response to any reward related cues such as sugar, salt, fat, spice. Think notifications. So every time there is a notification, there is a spike of dopamine in the brain, which lasts for about 2 to 3 minutes. And that leads to the response. Response is reaching for our device, and then we find a reward in the device. What is that reward? A new like, a new post, a new comment. Someone commented on our post, oh, you look so pretty. Oh, where are you on vacation? I'm jealous. We feel validated. And we go back for more validation. So I put all of this together into what I call is the trigger loop of wireless mobile devices, which begins with the cue of notification, leads to craving of dopamine, makes us reach for the device, gives us a reward, and the cycle repeats.
I completely agree that these devices and platforms are addictive by design. And at MAMA, we advocate for policies that will require tech companies to remove these addictive features for kids. But of course, in many cases, the tech is moving faster than we can keep up. And now the big topic of the day is artificial intelligence. In our last episode, Dr. Dana Susskind, who's a cochlear implant surgeon and an expert on early child development, spoke about the effect of AI on kids. Since AI is such a timely topic, I'm curious how you see AI generated content influencing this dynamic. What do you think parents should know?
So in order to understand AI and what it is doing to the brain, it's also important to understand a term called brain rot. What is brain rot? It is a slang for short form videos, low quality digital media that we are consuming in ways that we have never consumed before. Shorts, reels, TikToks. It has unfortunately become the dominant form of content that people online are consuming. What has AI got to do with this? AI is helping generate this content at a rate that is unimaginable. And it is amplifying this content at scale. Why is it gaining traction? Why do we get drawn towards AI generated short form videos? Because two things: it serves the platforms and it serves the human brain. How does it serve the platform? Well, we are engaged with the platforms for longer. The longer we are engaged, the more revenue it generates for the platforms. What about the human brain? Human brain is naturally drawn to low effort, repetitive, high stimulating activities, and AI generated content fulfills all of those requirements. So we are finding ourselves trapped into consuming more and more short form AI generated content.
When people ask me sort of what is the right age to give their child a smartphone or other device, at Mama, we so far have declined to give a specific age. First of all, because we know that harmful content exists on their platform, and really we should not give things to children until we know they are safe by design. But also, every child and every family situation is so different. But we do advise delay, delay, delay. What's exciting to see is how many parents of young children are proactively setting boundaries around screen time and also delaying giving their kids phones until much later than the previous generation. Given all the potential harms that you've outlined, I'm curious what you say to a parent of a young child if they ask you about when to give their child their own device.
Well, no, no, one size does not fit all. And this is the most frequent question that I'm asked, given the work that we do in digital wellness space. What is the correct age to introduce a smartphone to a child? It's funny, nobody has yet ever asked me what is the right age to introduce alcohol and cigarettes to a child. Let's say if a middle schooler comes home and asks their parents, everybody in my grade is drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes. I'm the only one not doing so, and I feel left out. What would we tell them? We would tell them, no, that is unacceptable. We're not going to sit down and create a contract, an alcohol drinking contract or a smoking contract with them. It's a plain no. Why? Because from decades of research, we know the harmful impact of those elements on a child's growing body and mind. However, for smartphones and social media, these elements have been around for only about 15 years. Research is only now starting to build up. So we find ourselves to be the guinea pigs as well as the pioneers in this big social experiment. What if I told you today that smartphones have the same dare I say, worse impact on your child's growing mind and body. No one is coming to rescue us, the parents. No one is looking out for us. We've got to look out for ourselves, and we've got to make decisions no matter how inconvenient those decisions are. So, with that background, if parents are still wondering what is the right age to introduce smartphone to their child, I would highly recommend delaying at least until age 16, keeping in mind that not all 16-year-olds will be ready for a smartphone, and there is a whole science behind that concept. But before you introduce smartphone to your child, do one thing. Get a piece of paper. On that, write down all of the activities and hobbies that your child currently enjoys: music, sports, art, being outdoors, and then make a reminder to come back and revisit that note 6 months after the smartphone and social media have been introduced to see how many of those activities does your child still enjoy. Because there is a pretty good chance introduction of smartphone might take away a piece of your child's childhood as well as a portion of their academic potential.
Ugh, it's so heartbreaking. And, of course, for older kids, in many cases, parents say to me, well, the horses left the barn, right? I already gave it to them. And the parents are now struggling to put boundaries up because they are seeing the harms manifest in their kids. What advice would you give to parents of teenagers who have already given their kids a device and are now struggling to manage their kids' screen time?
That is the second most frequent question I'm asked. How much screen time is okay per day? Well, how I answer that question is it doesn't matter how much time your child is spending on the screens. What matters is what else could or should have been done in that time. So, for example, an average person spends about 3 hours of leisurely doom scrolling time every day. 3 hours a day is about 21 hours a week, which is about 1,092 hours in a year, which is about 68 days in a year, where each of those days, all we are doing is doom scrolling for 16 and sleeping for 8. So a little over 2 months spent every year doom scrolling when we begin with 3 hours of leisurely time a day. Imagine the possibilities of what can be accomplished in a little over 2 months every year. Is it worth it? And that is a question that I would leave the parents to think about when they decide how much screen time is okay for my child per day.
That framing is really powerful. Thank you for that. And it's a really good segue into today's topic about summertime screen usage. With kids out of school, there are many, many more hours in the day that kids could spend online. And let's start with younger kids. So what is your main piece of advice for parents when they think about creating a more screen-free summer for their children?
The goal is not simply to reduce screen time. The goal is to shift that artificial dopamine hit induced stimulation to something more natural mood lifting, something that is driven by other mood lifting hormones such as serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. Where do we get those mood lifting hormones from that counter the effect of dopamine? We get those from nature, from sunlight, from friendships in real life, in person friendships, from creativity, from laughter, music, and from meaningful connections. So, this summer, I invite parents to think about one thing. Go ahead and reflect on your own childhood. What did you do when you were little and did not have unlimited access to screens? How did you kill boredom? Well, for me personally, we biked outside, we played, we built forts, we made up random games, we read books, we made art, we hung out in the neighborhood. We just found ways to kill our boredom without the constant stimulation of the screens. So, for parents who are struggling with how to keep the kids busy, it's only been 10 or 15 years when we have lived with screens. Up until that point, we know how to live without screens. So let's bring some of those elements of how we spent our own childhood and introduce those to our children.
What does that look like for children at different ages? Because,
So,
I know with elementary versus middle school versus teens, parents are thinking about different things.
so the principles are essentially the same for everybody. We've got to reduce the pool of dopamine. and increase the pull of serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. Why? Because dopamine lasts in our system for only about 2 to 3 minutes. Quick peak and then drop and out of the system, leaving us craving for more. Serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins, the mood lifting hormones, stay in our system for about 4 to 6 hours and sometimes even longer. So we've got to build opportunities to build those so that we are not finding ourselves reaching for dopamine. What does that look like in practical terms? For younger children, that might mean hanging out in the neighborhood with other friends, reading together, art, crafts, walking in nature, helping maybe in simple household projects, offline skills. For middle schoolers, it could be sports, bike rides, board games. I have a patient who organized unplugged birthday party with board games for his 14th birthday. They can also do camps, which do not include screens, music. For high schoolers, that might be a good time to get into volunteering activities, internship, leadership skills, taking up some independent projects, improving their communication skills with adults as they get ready for adulthood. Now, across all of the ages, I encourage families to make sure we are cutting the cord with our devices for at least 60 to 90 minutes every day while we are awake, and creating some rhythms around mealtime, bedtime, vacation, outdoor time, and while we are driving, things that are negotiable and screens do not need to be constantly present.
For my children, I also think a lot about chores. When they do chores, it's an opportunity to learn some real world skills. And the more you get in a habit of doing it, the more you get used to it. And another thing is also working. We have insisted our kids as they get older that they find jobs and they earn money. And for a lot of families, the kids have start work kind of early because they need the income as well. So, I think all of those experiences that are not on screens are allowing them to learn soft skills. What about the role of boredom? I know parents hear a lot of, but I'm bored. What do you think about that?
Boredom is our brain's default mode. We need to go into boredom to help us reset. Every time we work on an assignment, even as adults, for about 15 to 20 minutes, a sneaky voice in our head tells us, oh, you have worked hard enough. Now you need a break. And how do we take a break? We reach for our phone. In doing so, are we actually taking a break? We're not. We are actually overstimulating and overexhausting ourselves. So the question is, how do we actually take a break? Blink, hydrate, stretch. For every 20 minutes of screen time, look away 20 feet for 20 seconds to reset the eyes. Talk to a colleague if you are in an office setting. Just stretch a little bit and then reset and pay attention to whatever it was that needed attention. In doing so, we might actually have a better chance of refocusing and resetting our brain to that default mode of boredom.
In your book, there was a discussion of what you call the escape displace trap, and that there's an antidote to replace it with. Can you share a little bit about that with our audience?
Yes. So my favorite example for escape displace to engage replace is that of a butter knife. So we use butter knife to spread butter and then we put it back. We do not walk around the house holding a butter knife. We use the butter knife as a tool. We use what it was meant for, and then we put it away. How about we learn to retrain our brain to use our technology as a tool, pick it up for what it was necessary for, and then put it back down? We have come to a point where we are reaching for our devices for escape. What do we escape from? We escape from boredom, stress, anxiety, real life conflicts. Instead of escaping, we need to engage with things that are important, with projects, with people who we are actually in front of. So changing the conditioning of the brain from escape and displace to engage and replace. What do we displace? In that amount of time that we are spending on our devices, we tend to displace some essential activities. Exercise gets procrastinated. Sleep gets procrastinated. Work gets procrastinated. So instead of displacing those, let's put them back and let's re-engage with those activities.
Everything you advise makes sense. And we also hear from parents that their children really struggle with stress as a result of media withdrawal. So, given that kids are on screens a lot during the school year, how can we help them cut back in summer while minimizing the backlash? Any tips for that?
So minimizing the screen time would have to be a gradual process. Depending on how much screen your child has already been exposed to, that would direct or drive your approach to minimizing and pulling it back. Given the experience that I'm having with my patients in clinic, if we suddenly take away the video games and the social media and the phones, children will likely exhibit signs of withdrawal symptoms that could be anxiety, aggression, um, and it might become hard for families to deal with it. So slowly, and I talk about the four foundational steps of digital wellness that help with those four steps. Number one being deleting time consuming apps and content from the devices, one step at a time. Number two, physically separating ourselves from our devices for about 60 to 90 minutes every day. Number three, turning off non-essential notifications, the dings, the buzzes, the chimes. And number four, embracing boredom and showing it, role modeling it for our children that it's okay to be bored, not just for them, but for us as adults too.
Your book, Calm the Noise, is mostly aimed at adults, specifically about our relationship with tech and how we have the power to change it. What inspired you to focus on this topic instead of just on kids?
Well, Calm the Noise was born out of my own very real addiction to my own smartphone before I started teaching digital wellness. One day after work, I found myself lost in doom scrolling, completely forgetting that I needed to pick my kids from school. And that was a wake up call for me. That's when I realized that screen addiction is not a kid problem. It is a human problem. It is no longer just about kids and their mental health, it's about everyone. And unless we as adults learn to repair our fractured relationship with technology, we cannot expect the next generation to do any better. Long before children became addicted to screens, we had entangled ourselves with technology in some good ways and in some not so good ways, but to this extent that we found it hard to separate ourselves from our technology. And when our children begged for our attention, and this happened to me personally, we put them in front of their own screens so that everybody retreated into their own virtual worlds and nobody bothered anybody. So, Calm the Noise helps us reframe that conversation that adults must first repair their fractured relationship with technology so that we can help the next generation.
I admit my own media addiction is an issue and something that I'm constantly working on addressing. And I like how you frame the argument, not as anti-tech, but really about agency, namely that we have the power to shift how we think about and use technology. Can you tell me about this tool versus trap mindset shift
That
that
is the
you?
mind. Yes, that is the mindset shift that we advocate through our work at Freedom Foundation. Wireless mobile devices, that's what I call them. I refuse to call them smart devices because I think we give them way too much respect by calling them smart. So, wireless mobile devices were designed to be tools. We have to learn how to use them as tools, not as trap. When do they become a trap? When we start using our devices for escape from stress, anxiety, and boredom, when we start using them for 24/7 sources of distraction and entertainment, that is when they become addictive, not when we are using technology as a tool. So, as a community, as a nation, as a global public health crisis, it is time for us to come together and retrain and refocus on using our technology as a tool, not as a trap, so that it does not become addictive. We have to create a world where technology is enriching us and not engulfing us, where every moment in the offline world counts, where connections are made not just online, but offline as well.
And your Freedom Foundation aims to help adults and families regain the time, the energy, and the attention that's been siphoned off into our phones, primarily so we can live more joyfully. And that's just, I couldn't agree with you more that it's not just for kids because we adults need to lead by example. Do you have any other tips for us on how we can model that for our children and for other adults in our communities?
One thing that I personally do, I when I come home from work, I generally put my phone away in a box in a corner in the kitchen. All of my notifications are already turned off. The only thing that is on is phone call, so ringer. So in case my patients call me. And then my children see that the phone has been put away and I'm fully present for them. I'm engaged. If my phone rings, or if I remember something that I needed to send a prescription for a patient, or if I needed to text somebody, which needs to be done in the moment, before I reach for my phone, I inform my children that, hey, I'm reaching for my phone, and it's not because I'm bored, it's not because I'm finding an escape, but because there is something that I need to take care of right now, and I'll be right back with you after I have taken care of that. So that is one way that I'm telling them that when you have your phone, you better behave like that with me.
I love that. I mean, that was something in my own parenting journey that we ran into where we realized that even though we were using our phones for work, our children didn't know that we were using them for work. They just saw us reaching for our phone. So they could have thought we were watching dance videos. So I really love that idea of taking the time to fill in your family when you're using it, what the purpose is, so they can begin to differentiate. You've given us some great advice. Thank you so much. All of this, I think, can inform our parenting year round, but I especially love the way that you are helping us think about approaching the summer months. Before we come to a close, is there any final advice you'd like to give to parents?
It's not as complicated as we think it is. We do not have to wait for other people, other parents around us to get on board. If we start thinking about smartphones and social media in the same terms as we would think about drugs, alcohol, and smoking, it would become much easier for us as parents to make those choices for us. Those choices will be inconvenient, might feel hard to begin with and challenging to begin with, but trust me, you will be thankful that you made those choices, and your children might not be happy in the moment, but in about 10 years from now, they will thank you for not plugging them online 24/7.
This has been such a wonderful conversation, Dr. Gupta. I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights and advice for helping parents create a summer full of real world experiences for their kids. At Mama, we really share your desire to change our culture so that it's more centered on real joy and not just virtual experiences. And especially given the very real harm that kids face online. Every day, we're learning about new risks and new harms that are being amplified online because of the design of the algorithms. Friends, I'm going to include a link in the show notes on where you can get Dr. Gupta's book, Calm the Noise: Why Adults Must Escape Digital Addiction to Save the Next Generation. And we appreciate you tuning in today. Keep an eye out for our next Expert Insight Series talk, which will drop in July with Lindsay Lieberman, an attorney who fights for victims of revenge porn, sextortion, harassment, and sexual assault. Thank you again, Dr. Gupta, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to join us today.
Thank you, Julie.